The Rider and the Storm by Colin Webster. They say on dark and stormy nights a man rises from the ground to strut a black horse, and rides hell for leather across the mountains. They say a lot of things. They say the rider is chased by baying hounds from hell itself, seeking his trail with glowing eyes and flame behind their teeth. But they say a lot of things. They say the dark figure rides a bolt of lightning to the surface, that he lights a shuck out of Hades every chance he gets. The hounds chase him down every time, and drag him back to a dark prison, miles beneath the earth. They say if a body is out on such a night, and the hounds cross his path, well, they'll take him too. They say a lot of things. I was just a boy then, but did the work of a man. I wasn't yet 15, but I was tall, growed long and lean, like some breeds of dogs do afore they fill out. I carried my father's old Colt. It hung heavy off my hip, and an old Winchester that rattled around when I worked the action, but fired every time. I loved nothing more than riding my father's range, all by my lonesome, a big sky overhead, framed by the Wyoming mountains. The cattle ranged wide and wild then. We left them mostly alone till the gathering, but the endless miles of fence line needed constant repair. I had a bedroll and a side of smoked bacon, some flour, coffee, and salt, all beneath the seat of the buckboard, and I was happy. The wagon was filled to bursting with wire and nails, 2 shovels, and a few hammers and rough-hewn posts and such. Never had I been so far from the ranch house, but I followed the trail along the wire line that marked our lands off from the McCaskill spread, stopping every now and then to pin up a line or replace a rotting post. I was just tossing the hammer back in the wagon when the clouds seemed to swirl and darken. You could smell the rain coming. Old Jed, a cowhand that worked for my pa for years untold, except for the marks they left on his weathered face and knuckles, told me there was a cabin on the far end of the range, alongside of a tall hill at the foot of the mountains. Jed used to tell me stories when I was knee-high to a grasshopper. Stories of range wars and barroom brawls in town, 2 brands duking it out, winner take all for water rights to some stream or grazing land, or sometimes just for pure cussedness. Jed talked about fighting rustlers and bandits, how Pa had once shot 3 men dead from the saddle. Pa come in when he was a-tellin' it, and I had to wait 3 days to catch Jed alone so's he could finish the story. The horses were tuckered out, but I urged them on, not having any wish to spend the night taking cover from a Wyoming storm on a soggy bedroll under the wagon. A nice cozy cabin with hot coffee and a hot fire were tempting enough, even without the rain. The hill with the cabin didn't look that far when I started out, but by the time I found her, a light drizzle was already falling. There was a rough timber shelter for the horses, and I unhitched them and rubbed them down, tying them apart so they could still graze and get under cover when the storm hit. My mind kept thinking if I started the coffee first, it would be ready by the time I got done caring for the horses. But Jed had said a real cowhand always took care of his animals first, and at my age, of course, I was determined to be the best cowhand ever. A few more years, and I'd ride down to the southwest, carve my own territory out of that wild land to the south, and battle outlaws and rustlers and Injuns and thieves, just like my pa, and I'd make him proud. I forced all thoughts of comfort out of my mind until I was done with the animals. If only Pa could see me now, I thought. The cabin had a covered overhang right outside the door, where a load of rough timber had been chopped into a neat stack of wood. Someone had stayed the night of late. The cabin door was kept open. These were our lands, but a traveling man was known to cut across ranges from time to time, and as long as he caused no trouble and wasn't packing a running iron, no one took issue. There was a note inside on the crude table, pinned down with a small rock. It read, "Got stuck here on the 10th of March when my horse broke a leg. Taken off walking west of here. Thanks for the shelter. Cut a few cords of wood and stacked it to season. Mighty kind of you to leave some coffee and baccy here. Made a body feel right comfortable. Signed, T. Carlson." People would still do things like that back then. The wall had a few scrawls on it, most barely readable, travelers just passing through taking the time to leave a note as to who they were, where they were going, a poem or a bit of news on the wall. Most folks would take the time to chop some wood or repair a leak in the roof or make some other improvement. A few comfort items were usually left, and almost without exception folks would take just what they needed and no more, and even leave some small payment behind. I built a fire in the stone fireplace and put coffee on. The storm raged outside. There was something electrifying about the air. I propped open the door and watched the clouds tumble and swirl, the lightning flashing off the mountains. I felt like a grown man, all the way out there on the range by my lonesome, a gun on my hip, taking care of my father's ranch. He depended on me, trusted me. It was a good feeling. I never could understand how a body could take a job in town, sitting behind a counter all day in some stuffy fancy hotel or bank. This was for me, this wild country, barely tamed by my forebears, left to me and other young men to make a name for ourselves in. The lightning flashed, and I could have sworn for a moment I saw a dark silhouette on the hills in the distance. It was in the merest of moments, the sliver of time it takes for a lightning bolt to burn itself out. I could have sworn it was a man a horseback, but that was crazy. Who would be riding the hills at a time like this? Any sensible rider would be hunkered down as cozy as he could get in a thicket or under an overhang somewhere, not tearing about the countryside a horse. A sudden chill ran down my spine as I remembered the tales told around the campfire by Jed and the other cowhands, talking about some dark rider somebody's brother or whatnot claimed to have seen one dark and stormy night. Isn't that always how the best spook tales start? I laughed out loud to show the storm I was not afraid. I was a man grown, pulling my own load, and I had no time for such tales. I threw the side of bacon in an old cast-iron skillet from the wall and set it carefully over the flames. It wasn't long before it began to sizzle, and my mouth watered like a man what ain't seen food for days. I'd made me a pipe out of a corn cob, and I fetched a small pinch of tobacco out of the cupboard. Ma was horrified at the idea of me taking up smoking and other forms of what she called dissipation. But I was a man growed now, and I figured it was time I exercised my freedom. I lit the pipe and took a deep puff, near coughed out a lung. My throat felt burned. Must have done something wrong when I carved it. I tossed the whole affair into the fire. My mouth tasted like the remnants of a campfire. There was more to this than met the eye. Having set smoking on the back burner for the time being, I dug in my bag and unwrapped my second step into manly freedom. One of the cowhands had left the bottle up on a stump one Sunday of an evening. They'd shot the rest and just left this one there. There was still a good pull or two in it, and since no one had wanted it no more, I figured it wasn't stealing, even if Pa'd tan my hide butt good if he found out. But I was right careful, and with no one to spy on me and report my doings to either Ma or Pa, I settled back to the smell of frying bacon and pulled the cork from the bottle. I took a whiff. Ugh, it smelled like turpentine, but the cowpokes all drank the stuff, and they were strong and hearty. I heard one of them remark once how such a strong drink could put hair on a man's chest. I took a big gulp and swallowed before I could change my mind, and from the taste of it, I nearly did, or should have. A big shiver ran through my neck and arms, my face twisting into a grimace. By the powers, that stuff was plumb terrible. Quickly, I unbuttoned my shirt, but the slight growth of hair hadn't grown any thicker. Maybe I just hadn't drunk enough. I manned up and took another pull, and this one went down easier. I think because my tongue was still numb from the last. I cleared my throat and spit into the fire. Being a real man must mean everything's supposed to taste bad. Mighty disappointing. The wind blew hard outside the door. A sheet of rain blew into the cabin. I shielded my eyes and sprang to the door, pulling at the wood with both hands against the wind. From off in the distance, the wind carried to my ears a sound like the hunting dogs made when they were on the trail of a coon or a polecat. I had heard that men who indulged in too much of that there dissipation got a little touched in the head, claimed to see critters and such as the good Lord never put upon the earth. The thought made me mighty uneasy, but a feller'd surely have to have more than just a nip at a near-empty bottle to go crazy, wouldn't he? The liquor in my gut felt nice and warm, and the bacon was just about finished. I grabbed for the pan and then dropped it a sudden. That iron was mighty hot. The bacon and grease splashed on the cabin floor. Dirt and grit stuck to every inch. I stomped my boot hard. Disgusted, I scraped up the whole mess back into the pan, handle now wrapped with my kerchief, and tossed it out the door. Stepping out into the storm, a bright crack of lightning suddenly lit up the sky. A sudden sound of hoofbeats was the only warning I had, but I jumped back just in time to miss getting trampled by a tall black horse. Startled, I stared after the rider, his wide frame covered in a long black oilcloth jacket and black leather hat. He was gone in a heartbeat, and I sprang back inside the cabin. I couldn't imagine why he'd be tearing up and down the hills like that in the middle of that crazy storm, but it could be to no good and honest purpose. Rustlers! The man could be a scout, sent to spy out how many men were in the cabin. My jaw set hard. I knew it fell to me to defend my father's ranch. I fetched up my rifle, and it felt good holding it in my hands. This would be just like the stories the cowhands told around the fire of a night. The son of Joseph Turnbull, Quick Draw Quinn Turnbull they'd call me, drove a passel of rustlers off the ranch, single-handed like. Molly McCaskill would hear tell of it, no doubt, and she'd ask after me, and when they held the big jubilee in town, I'd be the one with her on my arm. And her older brother Elmer wouldn't be able to stop me. Hell, he'd be too scared to even give that mad dog stare of his like he done every time I went to town. I shook my head. I could tell the tale later. There'd be plenty of time after I dealt with the rustlers. My gut was tight, fluttery. What if I went out there just to get cut down in a hail of gunfire? The rustlers might just as well dump my body in a hollow as well as bury me proper, and Ma and Pa might never know what had become of me. I swallowed hard. The bottle was still setting on the table, one good swallow or two left. I had heard it referred to as liquid courage, and it sure couldn't hurt to have more of that in a time like this. No one ever had to know I'd stiffened my spine with a good belt or two. I snatched up the bottle and poured its contents down my gullet, ignoring the burning in my throat and tossing it aside, where it shattered on the floor. By the blazes, that had an effect. My gut stopped feeling like there was a sparrow stuck in it trying to fly its way out, and got all warm, and then the warmth spread to my arms, legs, and head. I was a man grown, I told myself. I'd go out there and meet those bandits head on. Heck, maybe there'd be one or two of them on a wanted poster, and once I overcame them, I would disarm them and ride into town leading them by a rope and collect the reward money. I shook my head again. The time for action was now. Leaping out the door, I kept my head low over the sights of the rifle, looking this way and that. It was pitch black now, the moon and stars covered by the dark, swirling clouds. A pack of dogs was baying somewhere. I could hear it now and again when the wind was right. Why would rustlers have dogs? There were packs of dogs here and there that would mate with coyotes. They were wild and feral, and we shot them whenever we could. Such animals were larger than your average coyote, and they'd rob the ranch of calves quicker than you'd believe. The lightning flashed again, and I shielded my eyes from the burst of light. Stars, but that was close. The baying grew louder. The dogs was coming closer. I saw no sign of the rustlers, but they might be hiding, waiting for me to make a move so they could cut me down. The baying hounds grew louder and louder, and I knew from experience they could be downright nasty critters when their blood was up. The first animal I had ever killed was one. Pa had taken me on a rambling path around the ranch. We tracked the dogs down with Pa's pedigreed hunting hounds, and he let me shoot. That was the same day he'd given me the beat-up old Winchester he used to carry. I was prouder than a rooster in the barnyard that day, showing every hand in the bunkhouse my new gun, not moving on till every man on the spread had heard the story of my triumph and praised the new rifle sufficiently. I was 9 years old, and had to tuck the butt of the rifle under my arm to fire it. Another bolt of lightning slashed across the sky. The rain stung my cheeks. I pulled my hat down low, eyeing the scrub and rocks for any sign of anyone trying to engine up on me. I heard the dogs again, much closer this time, but thunder rolled across the mountains, so loud it sounded like the mountains and the sky were pushing on each other to see who was the stronger. The wind blew hard sheets of rain in gusts that battered me and soaked me to the bone. A series of excited barks sounded from where I'd tied the horses, and I took off at a run. I could not let the wild dogs drag my horses down. A horse can defend itself pretty good from such critters, but not when there's a pack of them, and if I'd 'a guessed, I'd say there were at least 20 baying, barking hounds coming straight for the cabin. Another bolt lit up the rolling heavens, and in that moment I saw a sight I'll never forget so long as I live. A pack of fierce hounds with wide muzzles and fangs bared came over the rise. Their eyes glowed with a ghostly light, their gaping mouths too, as if their bellies were filled with fire, like a stove. My blood ran cold and my mouth tasted like copper of a sudden. I froze in place. The hounds tore up great chunks of earth as they came rushing towards me. I remembered the rifle in my hands, but it was like watching myself do it when the rifle swung up and a short, sharp flash erupted from the muzzle. The hounds didn't part or turn tail and run like any earthly dogs would. The one gave a sharp yip and tumbled, and then came up again running. My hands levered the rifle and fired while I just stood there, slack-jawed. The hounds responded with a wild howl, as one, then put their heads down and rushed. They moved so fast, if there'd been any doubt that they weren't earthly critters, that would end it right there. They were on me before I could flee. I levered the rifle as fast as I could, pumping shot after shot into the pack, but if it had an effect, I couldn't tell. They were all around me in a flash, and when the hammer clicked home without firing, it was the loudest sound of all. I swung the rifle like a club, wildly, and knocked one hound back, but 2 more replaced him, biting at my arms and legs. Jaws sank hard into my thigh, and another caught the edge of my shirt, and the rifle was torn from my grasp, the stock nothing but splinters. I beat my fist on the head of the hellhound biting my leg, but he paid it no mind. The rest circled, growling and snapping, looking for a chance to pounce and get in on the action. I screamed and dug for my hunting rifle with my one free hand. A pair of fiery jaws lunged towards my face, and I lurched and stretched my head to the side. The fangs snapped closed just inches from my head. My fingers closed on the knife, and I stuck it up through his jaws. The pointed edge popped out through the top of the hound's skull in a burst of flame. The knife was ripped from my grasp as the hound went scrabbling and whining on the wet ground. I remembered my 6-gun, and tucked my arms and rolled over and over, the dogs rolling under and over me. I was able to get my arm down low enough to grab the gun, though the dog biting down on the side of it like it was a side of bacon was worrying at my limbs so hard my fingers kept slipping on the wet handle before I could close my fingers firmly around it and draw. I felt a surge of anger and desperation well up inside me, and my skinny frame seemed to double in strength even as the blood flowed from my wounds. I jerked back and forth, hitting the dogs with my knees and elbows and everything else I could get hold of. The dog biting my arm started shaking it like a mortal dog would a rat, and I decided to give him a taste of his own medicine. I craned my neck around and bit down as hard as I could on his ear. It tasted like smoke and ashes, but I gnawed and tore until the hound yipped and let go, jumping back into the rest of the pack, still circling. Yet another hound darted in, but calm as Pa would have been. I drew the revolver and fired. The dog dropped like a stone and lay there quivering, making a hellish sound in between a growl and a whine. I slammed the barrel into the next one and fired 1, 2, 3 times, and it let loose too. My final shot sent another hellhound off biting its flank, where the bullet struck. The hounds circled. I was surrounded, but too terrified to accept my fate. Bleeding and battered, I took a step and leaped high over the nearest hellhound, smashing the heel of my boot in between its eyes, and took off a-running. The dogs took up their baying, and it was a race for the cabin and safety. They might be hellhounds, the ones people spoke of on those dark nights, but they were still dogs. The cabin was sturdy with a good strong door, and if I could close and bar it, I would be safe, at least for a time. The hellhounds were hard on my heels, but the fear of death was upon me, and I ran like a jackrabbit with a rattlesnake tied to his backside, and gained the doorway. Teeth snapped shut on the back of my trousers, and I fell forward, my nails digging into the doorframe. I kicked and scrabbled to pull myself into the cabin, but more dogs took hold of my legs and boots, began dragging me back out in the rain. My eyes wide with utter terror, I watched, transfixed, as the ground behind us crackled open, a dark orange glow, the color of flame, lining the edges from somewhere deep beneath the earth. The grass and rocks fell away, swallowed up by the giant mouth. I screamed, told God and Ma and Pa and Jed and everyone else I was sorry for all I'd done wrong, all I ever done, and I pleaded for another chance, for a miracle. I wanted to be home in bed with a fire going against the chill of the storm, a warm glass of milk, and Pa's strong, scarred hands tucking the covers around me. I wanted to see Ma one last time, at her needlework or plantin' in the garden. She was knitting me a new scarf for the next winter, and it seemed to me then the saddest thing ever that I'd never get to wear it. I wanted Jed to tell me one last story, one last time. Tears of regret and the deepest sorrow I've ever felt flowed down my face, mingling with the rain. The hellish beasts overwhelmed me. I fought like a cornered wildcat, but it was no use. There were too many, and they were too strong. Slowly, they dragged me to the very jaws of hell. I could smell smoke and brimstone like rotten eggs belching forth from the hole. I screamed. The sound of a galloping rider replaced my dying scream, and a sudden burst of gunfire picked off the hounds one by one. The black horse galloped past, its steel-shod hooves driving a divot in the ground inches from my head. All I could do was curl up in a ball and watch as the great big rider hit the ground with a grin, his greatcoat swirling in the wind behind him, and cut loose with twin pistols. The hounds bared their teeth and snarled, but he just stood there with that big grin of his and shot them down one by one as they leapt at him. My legs felt suddenly warm. The hounds surrounded him, circling, and he stuffed the guns back in their holsters under his jacket and came back out with a huge blade. He met the next charging hound with a slash that rocked the mountains, cleaving the hellhound in two in a burst of flame. Another hound went for his throat, but a great brawny fist smashed into the hound's jaw, and it went tumbling into the hole. Quicker than you'd think a feller of his size could, he turned, ducking yet another hound, and ripped it from the air, pulling it down under him. All I could see was his back and the coat. But there was a great crunching sound louder than the thunder, and the hound went limp. Casually, the stranger tossed the hound and its head aside, fiery tongues licking the air from each half of the torn mutt. Another hound sprang at me, jaws slavering, but the stranger's boots stomped down hard on its head, smashing it flat. The fire that spewed from its flattened skull singed my eyebrows. It was that close. In a flash of lightning you could see the big man's face, just for a moment. His cheeks were broad, his nose broken and bent, jaw thick and hard, stubble covered his chin. His teeth were big and white, though. His eyes were cold and hard. He skewered another hellhound with his great knife, but another closed its fangs on his boot, and he went down in a tumble with three more what set upon him. His fists and boots wreaked holy havoc on the pack, but whenever he tossed off one yelping into the night, two more would replace it, the seemingly slain dogs rising and crackling as broken bones were set right when they shook themselves like wet dogs do. He cursed the dogs and laughed, a great big booming mirth that echoed off the mountains, larger than life. It seemed like he was having a grand old time of it. A body wouldn't know they were slowly dragging him towards the mouth of Hades itself. You'd just think it was a friendly brawl between cowhands, as happened in the saloons in town of a Saturday night, just to hear him laugh. The brute dug fingers thick as sausages into the wet earth, making it hard as possible for the hounds to drag him into that flaming pit. He slugged one more off yipping into the pit before they drug him in, but he caught one arm on the ledge and pulled hard. Dogs was hanging off him and worrying at his legs and back, but with a mighty heave he hitched up a bit, and I could see his eyes bright and shining under the brim of his battered leather hat. He flashed me a wide grin. "Don't worry, kid. It's not the first time they've caught me, and it won't be the last." With that, he let go of the ledge and slid down into the hole. In an instant, the ground smashed itself back together again like a clap with thunder, and a body'd never know there was once a mouth into the depths of hell opened up right there. I stood gasping, my breath coming in ragged sighs, and walked stiff and shaky to the horses. I cut one loose and leapt on another's back, and rode all night through the rainy night back to the ranch house. In the morning, Pa found me trembling in bed with the covers over my head, my boots still on, dripping mud all over the sheets. It took 4 strong men to hold me down while the doctor come from town to dose me with laudanum and stitch my wounds shut. Ma said I was babbling over and over some manner of craziness about hell and demons and dark riders in the night. She thought I got attacked by wild dogs and took a fever. I'm an old man now. My hair's been white ever since that day, but the people still tell the tales. They still say on dark and stormy nights, a man rises from the ground atop a black horse and rides hell for leather across the mountains. They say the rider is chased by baying hounds from hell itself, seeking his trail with glowing eyes and flame behind their teeth. They say the dark figure rides a bolt of lightning to the surface, that he lights a shuck out of Hades every chance he gets. The hounds chase him down every time, and drag him back to a dark prison, miles beneath the earth. They say if a body is out on such a night, and the hounds cross his path, they'll take him too. They say the old man what runs the counter at the telegraph office seen him once, and they say there are scars on his arms and legs from those same hounds. They say that's why he never leaves town, and you'll never even see him outside when it storms. Not ever. But then, they say a lot of things.